Well, good morning, everybody. It's Tom Gurr with Pacific Technology Alliance. We're joined today by Oregon State Senator Arnie Roblan. He is from the 5th District of Oregon in Coos Bay. First of all, thank you for joining us. I really appreciate you giving us a few minutes of your time.
Great to be here.
Senator Roblan really brings a unique perspective. Not only is he from Coos Bay and a rural district that deals with rural connectivity issues, and it's something that he's been active on, but he's also been recently appointed co-chair of the Joint Special Committee on Coronavirus Response by Governor Kate Brown, and I think he's really got a unique perspective on two issues that are obviously, one is the issue of the day, and one is one of the burning issues kind of right now, which is rural broadband. And so jumped at the chance to have him with us, and I appreciate you giving us a little bit of your time. Thank you.
Actually, I was going to point out it was that the committee was appointed by the Senate President and the Speaker, not the Governor.
Oh, is that right? Okay.
Senate President selected me, and Paul Hovey, who's a representative from Eugene, was appointed as the other co-convener from the Speaker of the House. So now, since then, the Governor has appointed the two of us to her Economic Advisory Council, the subcommittees of that group. So we are involved both at the legislative level and at the executive level.
Wow. Well, that's good. That's great. I appreciate that. So I guess at the top, give us an update on how the response in Oregon to COVID-19 is going, and how you see this thing shaping up, and ultimately how is it impacting communities throughout Oregon? You know, your own community, Coos Bay, others. How is it coming together from your point of view?
So from my point of view, I think it's coming together as well as anyone could expect. As everybody knows, this was totally unexpected and totally new in all aspects. So the first thing was the two leaders in the legislature decided we should get ready for the eventuality of a special session and what that means and how to go about doing that. And so that was why the new joint committee was formed. Our job was to take some preliminary ideas of where the effects were going to be and come up with recommendations for that immediate response. What do we need to do from the legislative perspective to meet the needs of Oregonians at the beginning, and then to pose some questions about more long-term, what are we going to need to do? And so we got to work with a bipartisan group of Republicans, Democratic, House and Senate members, and actually, I think, showed the state that we as legislators during a time of emergency can come together respectfully, even though our last session had not ended well. We all got together and had very in-depth conversations as it went on. Leadership from the Senate, both the House Democrats and Republicans, and the House Democrats and Republicans started meeting at the leadership level to help give us some direction as to what the committee should do. And we continued to have real conversations. And at the end of that, made a 14, I think it was about an 18-page recommendations list to the Speaker and the President. We had anticipated that there might be a special session in those first couple of weeks, but what we found out fairly early on was that the governor's executive powers when in an emergency were pretty extensive, and that she really didn't need us to come in to do a lot of the stuff that we had recommended. And so what she decided to do was to use our recommendations as a roadmap of the kinds of things that she needed to find out. Does she have the executive power? Can she do the things that she needs to do to move forward? Because that is clearly quicker than having us come to session. Number two, we had to decide, could we hold an emergency, a special session remotely, so everybody didn't have to come in. We came to the conclusion that a regular special session would need to have a quorum of people from both the House and the Senate in order to convene in Salem. There is an opportunity in Article 10 of our Constitution to allow the governor to call a one-time emergency special session where you could do it remotely, and that was designed actually because of the idea of a subduction zone earthquake happening, and maybe people couldn't get there. So she has not decided to do that at this point. We then followed as she put executive session after executive session. We stayed home to stay safe. We've actually bent the curve pretty consistently in Oregon, and we're moving along. She set up an advisory committee on economics with about 40 or 50 people on that one, of which Representative Holvey and I are members, and we've been meeting weekly. They've also set up subgroups in those as we've started to have the conversation about reopening. So we've got a subgroup on retail, on recreation, on about 5 different areas that we are now working in subgroups to decide how to go about having the real conversation about reopening. She's listed the kinds of things we need to do in line with what the president had put in his list of things that needed to happen before we could move forward. So we're doing that. In the meantime, there were a few things that could not be done by the governor through executive work. And so we decided to hold, or the leadership decided to hold an e-board. Emergency board is a group of legislators, about 20 of us, House and Senate members, that come together and have the authority to spend some money that was assigned to them in the last session that we were in session. We had about $75 million of resources available. We took 25 of that in the first week, and we had an e-board meeting to give some direction to. We met again last week for one of those deals, all remotely. First time ever that we did a remote meeting at the e-board. And in that, we allocated about $32 million in areas that hadn't been covered. Domestic violence, we gave an extra couple $1 million for people to work on that. For taking care of people who have paid into unemployment but don't receive any benefits. That's some of our farm workers and others. We put another $10 million to small businesses who had not been able to get access to any small business money from either the last and maybe this new federal delegate legislation. We authorized $5 million, and the governor and her group put in another $5 million. And that came from our Business Oregon. Which, getting on to the other subject, is where we housed about a session and a half ago, along with others. We passed, we made a broadband office in that particular area in our Business Oregon, and they've been working. This last session, we had a bill, Representative Marsh and I, to actually figure out a way to fund that office. We were going to be using some of the providers that just have some a regular kind of a tax on them. Which was approved by them, and they were working, but the session didn't end, so we didn't get that done. So they've been working with some funds that have been coming through the governor's office. I am on the Broadband Advisory Committee, Rural Broadband Advisory Committee as well, that's been meeting. We met a couple weeks ago, and we put together, actually over the last couple of years, we have given a lot of recommendations, long-term and short-term, to the executive branch about what we need to do to move forward, recognizing that there are parts of our state who do not have broadband. There are a few schools left that don't have broadband. There's a few libraries around the state that don't have broadband. And in particular, much of our rural Eastern Oregon has little or no access. And having worked in mental health as well, we have seen the opportunity that exists for telemedicine, and in particular around mental health. And with this new virus problem, we're doing a whole lot more telemedicine. That has ramped up in ways that no one had envisioned being able to do it this early point, but we're getting a lot more of that done now. But again, there are deserts in our state where there is not the availability of internet connections that allow for that kind of stuff. And we need to get that done. It's something that has been on the Broadband Committee's work table forever. How do we get stuff put out in those places? So we sent a letter for short-term and long-term recommendations to the governor. Many of them are being done. So a lot of schools are now setting up little hotspots on their parking lots, and libraries are setting up hotspots in their parking lots, and that's giving access to people to drive by with their equipment, sit in the parking lot, and get on the internet, which is helping, but it still obviously does not serve the purpose. We had given good explanations that rural Oregon really needs high-speed internet because a lot of the newest advances in agriculture really have to do with having the availability of getting online. Washington has done some things with putting a lot of dark fiber out there, and if somebody wants to build their system, the fiber is already in place. And we had recommended long-term that every time we do a road construction project or a water project or whatever, we should put in the conduit and make sure that the infrastructure is there so we don't have to dig everything up to put it back in again. And it would be best if we actually, when we put in the conduit, we put in dark fiber. So we had fiber available for people who wanted to stand up some kind of an organization. And some of the places I've heard in Washington where the people who stood that up are the agricultural industry. Some company out there wanted to be able to get back. They had availability of fiber. They set up their own little system to allow them to do that. We need to make sure, like we did with rural electrification back in the 30s, 40s, and so on, get rural broadband everywhere, because that is a game changer for all of those communities and all of those people. And it's going to take an effort between public and private to make that happen. And so we've given a 3-page or 4-page letter to the governor about all of the recommendations from our broadband committee. And I think a lot of them they are working on and trying to make sure that's happening. I do know that a number of our rural providers out there have continued to do their work. They're still putting in fiber, trying to figure out how to expand. They know that right now, if they can get it to people, people will get online. They're making sure that they don't cut anybody off who's already on. I think the private providers have done a good job of making available what they have to the citizens that are out there, and like a lot of our other utilities, are making sure that people stay connected if they can get connected in the first place. So that's kind of a little bit of what we're doing.
Well, so you mentioned the legislature, and that sort of is a great segue to my next question. I'm curious. I know that there has been bipartisan efforts on rural broadband, and you described a few of them there. Obviously, the legislation this last session didn't go through. Didn't get passed. What does the future look like? What progress is being made in the legislature from your perspective? And obviously, this is a critical issue today. You mentioned telecommuting, you mentioned telemedicine. These are big components that are really important. And so I'm curious what progress is being made in the legislature on rural broadband.
Yeah, we have had in process not only this last session that didn't end. The session before, we'd had a bill that didn't quite make it through in those last couple of days when we hurriedly got together and finished passing some bills. So it's been around for a couple of years, and actually longer with the conversation. But I believe there's a very strong bipartisan support for getting funding for our rural broadband, also for helping get it to the places in the state that need. We've lost some money in the past from the federal government because we didn't have match for some of the programs that they have put in place to make sure all schools are hooked up and all libraries are hooked up. So we need to make sure in Oregon, and I think clearly now and even before, there is a really big bipartisan support for making sure at least that we find a way to have resources available to match any of that federal money that's coming in, so that we can, in fact, get the entire state wired. And that is going to be really important. We know that there's a lot of radio and other kinds of things besides the direct hookup with a line, but we know that the most reliable, the best way to make sure that people have access to that is a good infrastructure that allows you to get as quickly as you can from airwaves into little pulses of light going down those wires all over the world. So we've got to make sure that those are available in every corner of the state. And I think there's a really new emphasis on the urgency of that because of this crisis. And I when the legislature's back in session, I anticipate we will find ways to make sure that happens.
Mm-hmm. So, rural communities face a whole set of challenges, and connectivity happens to be one of the big ones. And you described several things that you're involved with. But what I'm curious about is what other ways are you working on broadband, and ultimately what are some of the avenues that your constituents, consumers in Oregon, how can they get engaged on the issue and help get their community, their rural community wired?
We have because of this crisis, we have a group called the Coastal Caucus. It's made up of legislators, Democrats, Republicans, and House and Senate members that represent all the counties on the coast. And we have been convening meetings twice a week and having meetings with all of our county commissioners, with citizens. So I'm on calls on a weekly, or mostly it's a 2 or 3 times a week meetings with my Yamhill County, my Lincoln County, Douglas County, Coos County, Lane County. So we're meeting on a regular basis and having these conversations. And clearly one thing that has come up the most, one is, how are we expecting students to learn when they have to do distance learning? And distance learning includes a lot of internet opportunities. In some places that doesn't exist. And in many homes, they didn't even have the equipment they needed to do it. So getting that out to people has become a bigger conversation in all of those county meetings, because we all know we want to make sure that kids have an opportunity to continue to learn while we're in this stay-at-home mode. So we've talked about that up and down. We've started to convene meetings with a county commissioner from each county up and down the coast, because one of the things we're looking at is how do we start to reopen recreation to get people back on the beaches, which has never been closed, but access to the beaches has been closed from parks and everything else. So how do we go about doing that? And how do we do it in a way that is safe? So many of our counties now have online registration for their parks and other kinds of things. So trying to figure out how to make sure that that's more accessible and that we can keep control of the number of people coming in and out as we try to reopen slowly. Because what happened early on this it happened in the same time, right at the beginning of this outbreak, and the north coast of Oregon got inundated. So people came from Washington, from Oregon, from California, all over, and they wiped out all the stores, so there was no food for the local people. They brought in the disease with them, not inadvertently, but some of our first cases on the coast happened because of that weekend, and we can trace it back. Law enforcement officers that had to go and talk to people, other people ended up being sick. And so we don't need our visitors right now. We love our visitors to the Oregon coast, but we don't. So having conversations about how do we give people the opportunity to visit the beach from afar is something that I think people are working at. But in general, every conversation that I have entails how do we use the resources we have to make sure that people come back slowly and do things appropriately. And so that's been a big conversation. We have an outbreak happening in Coos County right now because we got somehow one of the inmates in a local place got the disease. He'd been there for over a month, so they assume it came from some kind of contact either, and there weren't any guards that have tested positive. So we assume a community member that came in brought something in. That person now, there's been now up to 8 cases. So having those conversations and trying to figure out how to do all the contact tracing that we have to do when it happens, we've now got all of those things heighten the intensity and the need to make sure that we can get a hold of people, because contact tracing involves using the telephone, using the internet, following up on every contact people have had. And so all of these tools, which we used to think as helpful tools, are now becoming essential tools. You know, the big conversations about one cell phone talking to another so you can keep track of contact tracing that you didn't even realize you had might be really helpful. Also comes with it everything we've talked about with broadband, which is security, privacy, all of the big conversations that have been going on for a long time are now heightened because of the fear of the virus, the wishing and wanting to get back open again. All of those things are highlighted about the urgency that we now have to really strengthen our systems and make sure that they're safe and usable at all times.
Yeah. Wow. Well, I was right. I knew this would be a great conversation. I really appreciate you giving us a few minutes. I want to just say thank you. And I want to especially say to your family, to your staff, stay safe, be well. We really appreciate you giving us a couple minutes, and stay safe. Appreciate it. Thanks, Senator Roblan.
Thank you. You stay safe as well. Take care.
All right.
Bye-bye.